On this week's GCN Racing News Show, Pauline Ferrand-Prévot dominates the Tour de France Femmes AVEC Zwift and with that, basically completes the sport of cycling. I'll be looking at how she did it, as well as wrapping up the Clásica San Sebastián, Circuito de Getxo and all the latest transfer and retirement news. This week in the world of racing, we learned that Tadej Pogačar will not be racing La Vuelta this year. For much of 2025, we thought he'd be heading there to try and win it for the first time in his career, but the Tour de France clearly took it out of him. He will head instead to the two one-day races over in Canada ahead of his world title defence at the end of September in Rwanda. We also learnt that the tractor is retiring. Tim Declerq took to Instagram in the week to say that this season will be his last as a professional cyclist, and it'll also be the last season in the careers of Rafał Majka and Ellen van Dijk. More on all of those riders later on in the show. And finally, we learnt that Pauline Ferrand-Prévot has effectively completed the sport of cycling. Having returned to road racing just 5 months ago, she's since won Paris-Roubaix and now the Tour de France Femmes AVEC Zwift. Now before I get on to exactly how she did it last week, I'm going to list off her wins at the very highest level of the sport. Cyclocross, cross-country mountain bike and road world champion in 2014-15, the only riders can currently hold all three titles at the same time. World cross-country champion a further 4 times in her career, reigning Olympic mountain bike cross-country champion, world marathon mountain bike champion twice, world mountain bike short track champion twice, European cross-country champion twice, national cross-country mountain bike champion 4 times, national elite road champion twice, national time trial champion 3 times, national cyclocross champion 3 times, and then 8-time XYO World Cup overall winner. She's also won La Flèche Wallonne in 2014, and now she's of course a Paris-Roubaix winner and Tour de France winner as well. Plus the 2 hardest stages of the race at the weekend. I mean, it's an incredible list of achievements in just over a decade, to the point where you wonder, what has she got left to win? I'll talk about that later on, but first let's take a look at how she won it, because looking back at the way she rode the race is really interesting in hindsight. So she was of course very visible on the opening day of the race, attacking on the climb to the finish with 600 metres to go, only caught by Kim Lecourt and teammate Vos, who won the stage. Then for the next 6 stages, well, I wouldn't say she was invisible, but she didn't make a single attack, barely put her nose in the wind. And that, looking back, was genius. Nobody really knew what to expect from Ferrand-Prévot. Yes, she'd won Roubaix, but that's a very different prospect to the Col de la Madeleine. Now, the only recent data point that we had from her on a long climb was back in February at the UAE Tour. There, on Jebel Hafit, she was a long way off the pace, over 3.5 minutes behind stage and eventual overall winner, Elisa Longo Borghini, and only about half a minute ahead of Lorena Wiebes. Now, because of the lack of data points, it must have been hard for her rivals to even know if she was a rival or not. I mean, they all knew, and we all know, that she's a class bike rider, that's obvious. However, nobody outside of Ferrand-Prévot herself, and perhaps her inner circle, could have envisaged what she was about to do in the high mountains last weekend. But you can only imagine that Ferrand-Prévot knew how good she was feeling throughout the race. Saturday was the Queen stage of the race this year, only 112 kilometres long, but with over 3,500 metres of climbing. The Col de la Madeleine loomed large, not just that day actually, but from the very start of the race. Everybody knew it could be decisive, but perhaps not quite as decisive as it ended up being. At that point, Kim Lecourt of AG Insurance Soudal was still in the yellow jersey, but having been dropped on the biggest climb the previous day, she actually set to work on the front of the group of favourites to help her teammate Sarah Gigante. Which was fantastic to see, wasn't it? Not every rider who leads the Tour de France would be willing to do that while still in the maillot jaune. Her job came to an end with about 12 kilometres to the top, and Gigante went straight on the attack. There wasn't an immediate reaction from anyone but Paulina Royackers, who was glued to her wheel. Niewiadoma tried to bridge up to her, but failed, whilst race favourite Demi Vollering was behind in a group with Cabal, Vlodicic and Ferrand-Prévot. But whilst Vollering continued to slip back, Ferrand-Prévot bridged to Gigante, seemingly with ease. She got there just as Gigante's teammate, Justine Guéquira, had dropped back from the day's early breakaway. The Belgian champion set straight to work, pulling all sorts of grimaces as she pressed the pace for the next kilometre or so. Once she was done, Gigante pressed on, not asking Ferrand-Prévot for a turn. But the next teammate to drop back from the breakaway, it was Marianne Bunel from Visma Lease bike, and just like Guéquira, she set straight to work. The gap back to last year's winner, Niewiadoma, swelled to half a minute at that point. Brunel did a brilliant job, and when she swung off with 9Ks to go, that was the first time that Ferrand-Prévot really showed her cards. She continued to press the pace, and it was enough to distance Gigante almost immediately. Now at that point, when you were watching live, there was still a question mark as to whether Ferrand-Prévot was going too hard too early on the climb. But again, if you look back, you can see just how in control she was at that point. She soon caught the last remaining breakaway riders, and when she did so, she had a gap of over a minute and a half on Nubia Doma and even more on Vollering. 3Ks later, that had grown to 2 minutes, with Gigante at almost a minute, and by the finish line, it was even more than that. She crossed that finish line victorious, 1 minute 45 ahead of Gigante, 3 minutes and 3 ahead of Vollering, and 3 minutes 26 in front of Nubia Doma. It was the most dominant performance we've ever seen at the race in the mountains, one that gave her an advantage of over 2.5 minutes on GC with only one stage still remaining. She had a bit of a fright at the start of that final stage. There was a split on the first ascent that she got caught behind, but she didn't panic and she soon returned to the group of favourites. Once back there, she didn't really have to do anything or worry about anything, even though she was isolated from her teammates for much of that stage. Other rides and teams rode for their own objectives, which meant Pauline Ferrand-Prévot could just follow. Unfortunately for Sarah Gigante, she was distanced on a descent with 55 Ks to go, and despite her best efforts, she was never able to return to the front. Anna van der Breggen spent much of the stage solo off the front, but she got caught and dropped with 5 Ks to go to the top of the final classified climb of the race. FDJ Suez kept the pace high for much of the finale, knowing that Vollering could leapfrog Gigante on GC, but there was never really a point where it looked like they were racing to win the overall. Not least actually when Ferrand-Prévot went on the attack herself with 7 kilometres to the finish. She hit them from behind with speed and then steadily increased her advantage all the way to the finish line, crossing it 20 seconds in front of Vollering, 23 in front of Nubia Doma and Fisher Black. So what happened to Demi Vollering at the Tour de France last week then? Well, you would have to imagine that her crash in the early part of the race really knocked the stuffing out of her. I mean, it is always quite hard to quantify just how much of an effect a crash has on someone's performance, but whether it was that or something else, what was clear was that Vollering was not at the level that we've seen that she can be in the past. So to still finish second overall really is a testament to her mental strength. She started the race as the big favourite, she went there to win it, but even when she knew that that wasn't possible, she still gave it everything that she had. And it means that it's now almost 3 years since she last finished outside the top 2 in a stage race, which is a remarkable level of consistency. So this is how the general classification looked after the 9 stages. Ferrand-Prévot a whopping 3 minutes 42 in front of Vollering, with Nubia Doma taking her 4th consecutive podium at the race in 3rd. Dominika Vlodicic was probably the biggest surprise on the GC. She took 4th place for UAE ADQ, with Fisher Black in 5th. Gigante would have to settle for 6th in the end, but I hope she's proud of what she achieved last week. I mean, descending is clearly still a weakness for her, but she's still got time to improve on that. Labou, Cabal, Royakkers and Music rounded out the top 10 on GC. So what a week it was then for French cycling. Not only did Ferrand-Prévot dominate, but they also saw the emergence of a new star. UAE ADQ must have been gutted when Elisa Longo Borghini abandoned with illness early in the race, but not only did they take that 4th place on GC with Vlodicic, they also took 2 stage wins with the young French rider Maeva Squiban. Now her win on the stage into Ambert was a real big surprise, but then she backed that up 24 hours later with a carbon copy solo ride into Chambéry. She's only 23, so she has a massive future in front of her if last week was anything to go by. And it also meant that French riders won the last 4 stages of the race this year, plus the GC, and they had a further 3 rides in the top 10 on GC too. The Dutch only had 2, so maybe there's finally a shift in powers. Time will tell. Another rider to win back-to-back stages was Lorena Wiebes of SD Works, who also went home with the green jersey for the first time in her career, finishing 52 points clear of Vos. Elise Chabbey won the QOM competition in what was a 1-2 for FDJ Suez with Vollering in 2nd, whilst Nienke Vinke won the youth classification for Picnic Post NL. FDJ Suez also won the team prize. Now the only other stage win that I haven't mentioned yet was for Kim LaCour. What a fantastic race she and her team had last week. Just before I move on then, what is left for Pauline Ferrand-Prévot to win in cycling? Well, really, it's just some of the bigger one-day classics, isn't it? Obviously, she's ticked Roubaix off already, but in her post-race interview yesterday, she mentioned Flanders and Liège. I guess you could also add in San Remo and Strade Bianche to that list. There's also the Giro d'Italia, a race she finished runner-up at 11 years ago. The change of date next year with that race might help with that, as it will fit in better with another attempt at winning the Tour de France. So she's clearly still ambitious anyway, which is great, and given how quickly she started winning the biggest races on her return to the road, it wouldn't be a big surprise if she ticks off a couple more of those races in the next 12 months. Right, on the men's side, World Tour racing returned last Saturday with the Clásica San Sebastián. Isaac del Toro started as the big favourite in the absence of three-time winner Remco Evenepoel. And for a good while, he was looking good to take the win. He attacked with 43 k's remaining and only Giulio Ciccone was able to go with him. Roglic got close when he attacked, but then cracked just as del Toro made a second acceleration. The two of them then carved out a gap of almost a minute, but that started tumbling on the final climb of the day, the Miguel Toro. The only rider who actually managed to bridge the gap, though, was del Toro's teammate Jan Christen. So a great position for UAE to be in, 2 against 1. It'd be hard to lose, right? Well, you'd think so, but when Christen blasted straight past that leading duo, he dropped del Toro, but not Ciccone. He tried a couple of times, but not only did the Italian not budge, he then countered and went clear himself. From the top of that final climb to the finish, the gap between the two of them hovered around 10 seconds, and that's how it remained actually, until Ciccone knew he had the win in the bag, the biggest one-day classic win of his career so far. Christen took second, Van Gils third. Benoot continued an incredible run of consistency in one-day races by taking fourth, whilst del Toro ultimately had to settle for fifth. That said, he was back to winning ways just 24 hours later in the Circuito de Getxo. He attacked there with just over 16 k's to go, never to be seen again. That was his 8th win of the season so far and takes his career tally to 11. By the same age, for context, Pogačar had 12. So he's tracking pretty well, del Toro, isn't he? Just finally, the Tour de Wallonie concluded midweek with an overall win for Corbin Strong of IPT. The New Zealander took second place on the final 2 stages, which was enough to give him the GC by 9 seconds over Matthias Vacek of LIDL-Trek, who'd won the penultimate stage, the previous yellow jersey wearer Oliver Knight in third. It's a decent week for Cofidis actually, who also won the final stage with 23-year-old Clément Izquierdo. Right, a reminder now that you can watch a full season of bike racing live on Discovery Plus and Max, including the Tour of Poland, which kicks off today, and the Vuelta a Burgos, which starts this Wednesday. In Poland, Matt Brenner makes his return to competition. He'll be racing alongside Olaf Koy with Visma Lease Bike, whilst the likes of Tiberi, Van Gils and McNulty will be amongst those vying for GC. In Burgos, meanwhile, we'll see a rematch between del Toro and Ciccone, which should be a great watch if Saturday was anything to go by. Okay, back to the riders who are set to retire at the end of this season then. LIDL-Trek are going to lose 2 legends. Ellen van Dijk has spent the last 7 years with that team, having turned pro all the way back in 2006. A 3-time World Time Trial champion and Tour of Flanders winner, she'll retire with a total of 70 wins to her name, including 13 general classifications. Now 38 years old, she says she just isn't enjoying the sport as much now, citing recent crashes and a heightened sense of the danger that racing poses. Meanwhile, Tim Declerq retires with 0 pro wins to his name, but the respect of every single rider who ever raced with or against him. Declerq has spent more time riding at the front of a peloton than many other pros put together. His ability to control breakaways with little help from others was second to none. Many a teammate has won multiple races because of the help Declerq gave them, and the messages under his Instagram post really underlined how liked and respected he is. Congratulations to both of them on amazing careers, and as well too to Rafał Majka. In more recent years, Majka has turned into a super domestique in the mountains and on the climbs, shepherding Pogačar to wins at the Tour and Giro, amongst other races. He won 16 races in his own right too though, one of which was gifted by Pogačar after they did rock, paper, scissors coming towards the line at a stage of the Tour of Slovenia. He also won 3 stages of the Tour de France in his own right, plus the KOM jersey twice, plus 2 stages of La Vuelta, where he also took a 3rd place on GC. This year he also won the Polish Championships for the 2nd time in his career, and you can watch him in action in his home tour this week, but his last race is going to be at Lombardia in mid-October. Right, a couple of bits of transfer news now. Jasper Stuyven moves from LIDL-Trek to Soudal Quickstep, which might signal the start of a move back to a classic squad for them, whilst Attila Valter goes from Visma to Bahrain Victorious. Both of them have penned 3-year deals with their new teams. Meanwhile, Tim Rex is being promoted to Visma's pro team from their development squad. And just finally, Lidl are set to take a controlling stake in the team that they're currently headline sponsor of, LIDL-Trek. And fantastic to see such a big company really investing in the sport for the long term, isn't it? Okay, that brings to a close the Racing News Show for this week, but I'll see you again next Monday.